Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the second installment of HSMAI's Recovery Connections. I'm really glad that you're here. HSMAI's Revenue Optimization Advisory Board is very deliberately designed today's session. First, we'll hear very relevant content and actionable insights from our panel of thought leaders. And then you'll have time to connect and learn from hospitality professionals like yourself who are driving the hotel industry's recovery. We have just a couple housekeeping announcements before we jump in, and I'll make it really quick. So first, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Ideas and SHR. We can't do programs like this without their support, so thank you all very much. Mark your calendars for next week's installment of Recovery Connections. It's in the marketing track, all about inspiring guest confidence, which is really the new value proposition. Like at any face-to-face HSMAI event, our confidentiality and antitrust guidelines apply. So there should be no discussions of pricing, costs, terms, doing business or not doing business with a particular company, etc. I think you all know the ins and outs of that, but if you have any questions at all, those guidelines are on the Recovery Connections website. If you have any technical issues today, tech support is standing by. In the lower left corner of your screen, there's a little pink circle with a question mark in it. You can click on that and tech support will be there to help you with anything that you need. When we get back to our roundtables, the connections portion of Recovery Connections only works if everybody is engaged. So please turn on your camera and turn on your mic and encourage those at your table to do the same so that you can connect and learn from one another. Just a reminder, if someone's at your table but they don't have their camera and mic on, they can still hear you. So you can encourage them verbally and they'll know they'll be able to hear you. If you have questions for our panelists today, use the Q&A chat section on your screen to the right, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. Just a little hint on making the most out of this Remo platform. For any window, whether it's a speaker window or a slide window, you can make it bigger and smaller with the little arrows in the corner. So we're not going to have very many slides today, but that's a hint that will be helpful in the future for future sessions. And without further ado, let's get on with it. I'd like to invite today's speakers to the stage. So Brian, Jennifer, Lori, and Hunter, will you please turn on your cameras and mics and join me on stage? Fantastic. All right, here you all are. Well, I'm going to hand it over to Lori Keel, who is today's moderator. Lori, I'll disappear, but be standing by in the wings.
Thank you, Julie. Well, what an honor to be here with all of you. I get to see there's 30 eyeballs looking at us right now, or I guess maybe if you have 2, that's 60, but that is great. We are so excited to be here with you. My name is Lori Keel, and I am the Chief Revenue and Marketing Officer for the Kessler Collection, and so excited to get invited to moderate this session. Your panelists today are Brian Hicks with IHG, and Jennifer Hill. And what we're going to be talking about today is recovery. Recovery is going to vary by market and hotel type, as we know. So how are you going to set meaningful goals and expectations for your team and owners, most importantly? This session is designed to help you understand alternatives to a traditional goal-setting process, give you some ideas about how to structure goals and incentives, and help you break your process down to the basics. I think the attendance will probably double if word gets out that we have the experts that know the answers to this. So with that, I would like to ask Brian and Jennifer and Hunter to introduce themselves, and I challenge them to tell you one thing that they're doing outside of work these days. So Brian, why don't you start us off?
Thanks, Lori. Good afternoon, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Brian Hicks. I'm the Senior Vice President of Commercial and Revenue Management for IHG. I've been in the industry for 30 some odd years. I've seen everything, but definitely haven't seen anything like we've had this year. Outside of work, I have 2 little kids and a new dog. So I am learning to train a puppy, a golden doodle, which is pretty cliche these days, but we love little Louie, and I just need him to get to a stage where he stops jumping on people when he meets everybody. So that's my little tidbit.
Okay. I guess I'll go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hunter Webster, and it's good to be here. I have been in the industry for a long time, 30 years, and recently I had worked for interstate hotels for 16 years. Currently, I'm doing some consulting work and staying close to the industry. Like so many of our friends out there, I was impacted by COVID-19 with the industry, and we're staying positive and moving forward. I would say that one thing that I am going through and dealing with, I have a daughter who is a freshman in college, and we are adapting to her remote learning and helping her kind of figure out how to deal with this whole process, because, as we all know, it's not for everyone. And some folks need a little more help than others. So I am part teacher, part consultant, part dad. So a little bit of everything.
Thank you, Hunter.
I think we can all relate to that, Hunter. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Jennifer Hill. I'm the Vice President of Client Solutions at Calibre Labs, which is a next generation benchmarking company. Prior to joining Calibre Labs, I was on the hotel side in revenue and operations for a long time. I think I'm coming up on nearly 20 years of full-time experience in the industry, even though I grew up around it. I think that, if any of you know me, besides the Peloton obsession, I've been reading a lot more. I've been sort of forcing myself to do that. And so I just stayed up too late last night, so forgive me if I trip over my words, finishing Sing Unburied Sing, which is a book by Jessamine Ward. It's sort of her second novel. And she just put out a new one this year. So I'm probably going to dig into that next, but trying to make use of the time at home.
Thank you, Jen. That's great. All right, so let's get down to it. We need to know. I'm going to start with Brian. The question I have for you and the expertise that we need is the impact to our industry is definitely a disruption and not a recession or an economic downturn. How should we look at a disruption different to other impacts we have felt before?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you prefaced it with the fact that this is a disruption and not a recession. The key things that I'm looking at are, what are the key differences between a recession, a downturn, even an impact like 9/11, where there were, it was an event and a short-term event that had long-term implications. And if anything, I'd relate more to that event. But this disruption, there are so many factors that are very different from a recession. The key things that I'm looking at are the financial situation. So banks have money to lend. We think back to a recession, it was difficult to get lending. While unemployment has been decimated, it will recover. It's not a matter of, we're in such a recession that businesses aren't going to continue to thrive. They will. It's just going to take some time. And then you have the other are, kind of external to our industry, but they're things like a vaccine or a treatment or other factors that are going to play into the recovery of travel. It could happen very quickly. It could take some time. And of course, it's going to be different across all various countries, regions, and also then economic factors. So looking at it as a disruption gives you a different lens based on that understanding that the outside influences are very different. So my recommendation is to really understand those differences, whether it be the financial situation, the health of brands that are out there signing and opening up new hotels, right? Compression in certain markets. We all talked about for years, when are we going to hit that point of too much development that we're just going to crash and everything's going to stop? Well, it's kind of all solved itself for us at this point, which is a good thing in some ways. So I think just watching the recovery and with a very different lens moving forward is the way we should look at the disruption versus a recession.
Thank you, Brian. I think that's a really interesting point, because I'm sure that many of you, as you're sitting in those budget meetings right now, likely you have owners or managers that are saying, well, let's look at the recession, and that might tell us how we're going to recover. And again, that point, Brian, about it being a disruption is something we really need to continue to drive home, so that we're all playing on that level playing field. Now, what it changes, if I move over to Hunter for a second, what I'd like to understand is, with the industry going through what really is the biggest transition it's ever had, sales and revenue leaders are being tasked with thinking about how they approach their jobs differently in a disruption. How should these leaders think about how they can bring value and drive revenues to their organizations and owners where they are?
It's a great question, Laura, and I think everyone is being asked to look at what they do on a daily basis a little different, right? If you are in sales, you're probably participating more in the direct sales effort. Meaning, if you're at the corporate level or regional level, and you have above property responsibility, you're probably digging a lot more now into the actual calling on customers and direct sales component that you may not have had to do in the past. But look, the reality is that you're all very seasoned, everyone's very seasoned, and while you may not have done it in a while, you haven't forgotten how to do it, right? So I think everyone's got to get comfortable with maybe doing some things and shaking off the rust of doing some things that you haven't done in a bit. If you are in revenue, if you are, for example, above property, as an area person, you're probably now, you probably have a bigger portfolio of hotels than you had before. So if you were one person for maybe 8 hotels in the past, you're now probably doing it for a heck of a lot more. So how are you managing your day? How you're staying on top of what's happening with rate and inventory in these different markets that you now have responsibility for becomes that much more important, and that you really have to now more than ever be really disciplined in how you are handling and managing your day, because you just have a lot more balls that the AFC has to deal with. And if you're not on top of things, things can slip through the cracks. So I think, these kind of things, as a sales or revenue person, realizing that, you're going to be tasked to do things that are probably a bit more than what you've been able to do, and taking it from a
Yeah, thank you, Hunter. I think that's a really good point. And it makes me think about, again, with the disruption and then with the ever evolving disciplines, like, what I sit back some days and I wonder, what was it that I used to do? Because I don't even remember what that looked like anymore. And then furthermore, again, the title of this webinar is hitting the bullseye when your target shrinks and expands. And so I think earlier I was sitting at a table and someone had said, I'm starting to, what I thought might happen because of seasonality is not necessarily happening. The target is still expanding. But then when I'm watching the news this morning, I'm hearing that there's 4 states that are starting to shut down anything that's non-essential in travel, which means it's going to retract again.
Right.
So in that case, I'm going to go to Jen and say, Jennifer, working for Calibri, what metrics do you have that you all are working with that have changed since the start of the pandemic, and how are you playing that? Being a metrics provider has got to be so difficult in this environment.
I think that's a great question and a great point, right? Like every day it changes. And you're thinking about planning for tomorrow when this time, usually in a month, you'd be submitting a forecast for the next 30, 60, 90 days. And certainly we all know October means budget planning. So you'd be submitting your quote unquote forecast for 2021. But in terms of the metrics that we should be sort of focused on and are focused on in Calibri Labs, our core metrics haven't changed. I think, in fact, sort of given the trajectory of early recovery, we're finding our metrics, specifically focusing on profit contribution and channel mix, have become even more relevant than they ever have been before. It was information that I think in some ways was a nice to have, and then, it became a want to have, and now it's a need to have to really understand how business is returning to each hotel by hotel. It's different by hotel type. It's different by market. It's different by sub-market. What's happening in downtown Atlanta is not what's happening at the airport. What's happening in downtown San Diego is not what's happening when you are in a more leisure-driven area of the city, right? So, I think that it's been so important to understand the profitability of the business, of what little is coming in, or if you're in one of the areas that's being flooded by leisure travel, to know, like, are you taking the right thing? And are you just so excited that business is coming in? You're just happy to have it, but you have to, really set some intention and meaning in terms of what you want to bring in and what you're looking for. So, truly understanding the volume coming into the market, the actualized volume, is critical. I think one of the most interesting trends we're seeing is that loyalty member rates, not burning points, but earning them through those discounts that you get logged in or get for being logged into your account, are tracking along with OTA demand share. We've never seen this before. There has never been a time in our history where loyalty contribution has been on par or better in some cases, in some chain scales, with loyalty member contribution. And those book direct campaigns that really started about 4 or 5 years ago now and have gained a lot of traction have benefited hotels that are participating. Obviously, if you're an independent hotel or a smaller brand or chain, it may not be as valuable to you, but we've never seen that before. And it's really remarkable to know that, particularly in luxury and upper upscale, where there's a greater gap in performance because of corporate and group being missing, that there are other alternatives versus just having to be happy with whatever might walk through your door. All business is equal opportunity right now, but understanding who's actually getting that business and that it's realistically available to you, I think, is more important than ever. And those are metrics that we've continued to track and have seen, again, consistently week over week since mid-March, that loyalty member rate really in a horse race with some of the other channels that we have relied on historically in a downturn or a recession.
That is really interesting. I had been privy to some information that Marriott had put out last week. And I believe what I understood them to say is that they were almost frustrated with the loyalty aspect of the brand, really believing that there was more loyalty to the brand. And hence that's where they had put all their efforts during COVID, as they froze everything and really only did marketing of the loyalty program. But yet I don't believe that they're satisfied with the return that they're seeing in that. What would you say about that, Jen?
I think that we're all hungry to get back to normal. And so when you're thinking about human cost, quite frankly, right? Like it's not a secret. The Marriott's, sort of been decimated. Most companies have. So I think sometimes when you think about the effort that you allowed maybe for field marketing for that, you want a huge return. You want something that says this was absolutely the right decision, making sure that this was staffed and had the attention and time and money applied to it makes up for having to reassign or, unfortunately lay off hundreds and thousands of people, right? So I think that the numbers show that they're working. Obviously, our data is, more than just Marriott, but it is obviously one of the big drivers of the success of that particular rate segment because it is the largest loyalty program. Mobile check-in, things that create the ability for contactless travel. Loyalty programs are just going to continue to create bias towards those things. So it definitely isn't, kind of a give up the ghost type situation. Like just because you are not experiencing it doesn't mean it hasn't come or it's not going to come yet, right? Every hotel, every market is different. This is, as Brian was saying, different than what we've ever seen before. And so it's not like you're going to see everybody start to rise all together again. To your point, Lori, of course, they're completely shutting down. That's going to be pretty dramatic. I think we're definitely not medical opinion here or scientific opinion, but I mean, it seems like the second wave that we've all been promised is coming. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that changes the trajectory of our recovery as a whole.
Yeah, thank you. That's very insightful. I want to take a commercial break here and remind everybody, I see we have 35 people on our webinar. I'm watching for Q&A and we welcome it. So if you have questions or comments, run over to the chat or the Q&A and ask, because we would love to answer real time for you. We want you to be a part of the conversation. So with that, I want to do a little lightning round with you real quick, the three of you. And in no more than 5 words, we didn't rehearse this, by the way, so someone's going to kill me after this, but in less than 5 words, tell me what you think is the most important KPI, key performance indicator, right now. Brian.
Market share.
Thank you. Hunter.
Future booking pace. You caught me with that one, sorry.
You had 3 future booking pace. I love it. I love it. And Jen?
Channel mix.
Channel mix. Thank you.
We should all be better at counting than we are. Don't tell anybody.
We do have our first question from the audience. They said, can you clarify, are folks using points to make bookings? Anyone know?
I can speak to that. From a, Jennifer and Calabria had shared some of that data with us at IHG, and we, kind of looked into it. And, it's not necessarily the point redemption, it's more on the point earning side. So, and it makes sense as we dug into it. I myself, as I'm sure many of you think about how many nights we spent in a hotel. We're at the elite status, right? A lot of times it's the necessary travel. So it seems obvious we're going to be the first ones to get back out on the road, right? And anybody who's staying a large number of nights and collecting loyalty status, a lot of them it's essential travel. So, we're not surprised that we're seeing that. And on top of it, as most of the big brands and loyalty programs have been doing, there are some great incentives as well during this time period. So double, triple points, what have you. So a lot of that's also kind of driving some of that behavior. But to me, it's not a surprise that, those of us that, virtually traveled for a living in many ways, shape or form are the first ones that want to get back out there. And I want to stay in a hotel. I've had one hotel stay since mid-March, and it it was exciting. It was thrilling. So it's and also building on that confidence of having a great travel experience. I sat in yesterday on a invitation from Delta on their Delta Cares program. I thought it was fantastic, and it's just building that confidence in our industry, and we need more of that.
I think that's a really good, I love it. Thank you. It's a great assessment. And I think that what's also going to be interesting forward looking is as people are not traveling, they're not accumulating those points, they're not accumulating that status. And you're already starting to see the brands make modifications in order to allow somebody to maintain an elite status. But what's to come, I believe, is probably a lot of change in the future. So we'll all have to stay tuned and see what that looks like. I would like to ask, when we go back to the target, again, let's talk about this target and goals, which seem really so elusive at this point. I'm going to go back to you, Brian, for a second, because I want to understand, how do hotels set realistic goals and at the same time have meaningful incentives in place to drive revenue? How are you doing that in 2021?
Yeah, look, the reality is some of the best salespeople that are out there are highly motivated by achievable targets with the potential for a significant bonus based on outperformance. And I think we can all agree, bonuses for the year 2020 are probably a wash, right? Expectations are extremely low across our business. People understand the pandemic. They understand what's happened to our industry. The challenge that we have is ownership is being propped up a little bit today by stimulus package or debt service relief. And a lot of that's going to go away in 2021. What's not going to go away is a good salesperson wanting to be incentivized to drive sales into a hotel. So, I really think we're going to have what would typically might have been a really healthy conversation around budget and ownership expectations and the realistic expectations of a hotel. And it could be very difficult, and it could be a very emotional discussion. One of the things that I've been contemplating, I haven't made the decision yet, but I look across the various sales incentives, and in some cases I've seen where virtually half of the incentive is covered off in a bonus and the other half is salary. Sometimes it's 80% salary and 20% bonus. I think we need to be realistic for the next couple of years to understand that maybe we adjust those values to say, we're just going to give you a 80% bonus, 80% salary this year to keep you incentivized, keep you going. And as we get to recovery, we'll shift those expectations. My fear is we're going to lose some really good salespeople to other industries. We're already seeing it. And I just don't want that to happen. So I really want to figure out how we try to keep good people in place.
That's a great way to answer the question. Thank you. I think I think those are really some sound advice. I hadn't thought about just add some salary back in and take the incentive component away, add activity to the salary and make it an expectation of accountability. That's great insight, Brian.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience, and that is anyone seeing any new trends with small essential meetings?
I can take a stab at it. We don't track meetings specifically, but we do track group business, of course. As part of our sort of industry community service over the past 7 months, we've updated some weekly data that includes from about 1,500 hotels sample size, group pickup, sort of net new, and then F&B and meetings, sort of cancellation rates, also net pickup. And what we're seeing in those numbers is that short-term pickup, like in the month, for the month, and bleeding into the next week or two, has really been pretty consistent over the past 6 weeks without a subsequent decline in later months, right? So we're pretty much outside the booking window, or we have been inside the booking window rather, for a lot of these meetings. And so they're not on the books to be canceled. So we're seeing cancellations slow down, but net new bookings are increasing, but really only in the next 4 to 6 weeks, sort of going back to the trend that Lori mentioned hearing on the news this morning, is that as restrictions change, in the DC area, you can have a much smaller meeting in DC, but if you go next door to Prince George's County, you can triple the size of your meeting. And I think what's going to happen as local jurisdictions make those changes is that people might still be meeting in that same metro area, but they're going to be next door. They're going to be in the county over, they're going to be in the next city over, because everybody sort of has their own rules and regulations. So, Tim, I know it doesn't answer the question specifically, but, anecdotally, I think we all see people traveling a little bit more. We see, photos on LinkedIn of those virtual meetings. And at least in the data that we do have and collect on that, we're starting to see a little bit of a hint that short term is definitely picking up a little bit more, probably before the holidays.
That's good news. I think that's good news. We'll take it. We have another question from the audience. They said, after setting your group 2021 forecast and budget, do you anticipate it will change given the number of uncertain variables? Therefore, the sales targets will change. Anyone want to take that one? Hunter, you're smiling. I'm going to put you on the spot on that one. What do you think?
I think the budgets are all going to be will be in a state of flux. We all know the budget process. There's always this process of a lot of changes that happen before the budget is actually finalized and baked. I think that'll probably increase more than what it has in the past, because there is so much uncertainty. And the one thing that everyone understands, and which is the difference between a disruption and a downturn, is that when you look at downturns, you can look at historical time frames, even if you go back a year or two or whatever, to kind of get some sense of what's going to happen tomorrow. The problem now is that everything that is going on is so unprecedented that to think about, when business will return, when do you think things are going to improve, what does Q1 2021 look like, is really hard to do. So, owners, I think, fully understand that, in that you're going to see probably a very high level of calibration in budgets and forecasts up until as late as possible. Owners at some point are going to have to be able to, especially the institutional investors, where they have to communicate to the investors in Wall Street or what have you, as to what does tomorrow look like for them. But I think that everyone is just going to needs to be extremely flexible with holding to a hard target, especially setting it now, in October, and saying, here's what Q1 or Q2 of 2021 is going to look like. You can't. You just can't. And I think owners get that, and so there's going to be unfortunately for the operator, there's going to be multiple updates and changes to your budgets going into next year.
Yeah. I used to think that my crystal ball was fuzzy. I think my crystal ball is just cracked. It's completely cracked.
Well, I think one of the interesting things that came up in our planning conversation for this meeting today, is the idea of, like, interval goals or interval planning. And I've been thinking a lot about that because I really like it. You know, it takes a lot of work to get everybody on the same page and make sure that everyone's on board, particularly, you know, with sort of financial requirements and goals that have to be met. It's important to make sure that those conversations are ongoing. But as Hunter was just chatting, you know, sort of in an effort to answer that question, it occurred to me that we already do this. Right? We write a budget that we know when it's finalized, that on January 1, it becomes obsolete. And our updated goal planning is forecasting, right? We write a forecast every month. And what the difference, I think we have to think about it is this is something we've already been doing. We've already been giving updated expectations to ownership groups and asset managers and lenders. The key difference is that we might have a bigger gap to budget than they would previously have found acceptable. And it's about, I think, the storytelling around that gap, understanding what's causing it, if it actually is sort of something that can be overcome, or is this really something that has to be knocked back down? But we have, for years and decades, been in the practice of revising expectations through our forecast process. Every 30, 60, 90 days, we've been doing that. But it's always been, well, it's, you know, this far off from budget, and we all spin our, you know, wheels and bang our head against the wall and, you know, try to force something that may not be there. And now we sort of have this very real reason why it won't be there. So I think we just have to reframe the way we're looking at it a little bit more and you know, and adopt the idea that we've been doing this. It just, the conversation around it has changed a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. I really appreciate that. I wrote down when Hunter said unprecedented. I wrote the word down because we keep hearing it. And as humans, we like precedents. I don't know that we ever knew that before now, but we like to believe that we're doing what we've always done. And I love the relevance that you're bringing to it, which is, guys, we've been resetting for years. We do it every month, 30, 60, 90, sometimes full years. So it really isn't that difference. There's just a level of, it's a little more of a guessing game these days than it felt like before. So we are going to move into our breakouts, which means I've got 36 people on in our meeting, and we want 36 people back. So we have a couple of things we want to set you out to your breakouts to do. The first thing is, let's open up the discussion around a couple of questions. And these are the questions we have. So please take notes so that you can be a moderator at your table. What are some of the tools you're using to support your planning, and have they changed? And the next one is, what are you finding lacking in your planning process? Has that changed from previous budget planning experiences? And then listen, if you get done early or you just can't come up with an answer to the first two, what has your favorite binge watch been during the pandemic? Bring that back. We would love to talk about that. Okay, so with that, Julie, if you could help us.
I will help you. Thank you all. I thought it was fascinating listening to you share your wisdom and insight. I know we have a bunch more questions in the Q&A box that we didn't get to. So for those who didn't get their question answered in the full format, all of our speakers will be sitting at the speaker table in the bottom right corner of your screen on the floor plan. Feel free to pop in and get the answer to your question one-on-one. So please do that. I'm not going to pull up my slides, but I do have a couple last little things I want to tell you all before you head off. So one is the recording for this session will be in the Recovery Connections on-demand library within 24 hours, so you'll be able to go back and access it. Another important thing to remember is that if you're looking for additional revenue optimization education for yourself or for your team, we have our Revenue Optimization Essentials program. I saw Tim Wiersma, who leads that class, is in this session too. So if you have any questions about it, you might seek out Tim for a little bit of information. We have a course starting in 2 weeks on that. And then as Lori said, when we're in our in our breakouts and our table discussions, engage and participate. You don't have to be camera ready. Like, just, this is a come as you are among friends, because we want to learn from you, and you can really help the industry by learning from your colleagues and peers. So we'll go into our table breakouts. I'll post the first question as a reminder, give you 7 minutes, and then give you the second question. So before we go, one last time, first question: what are some of the tools you're using to support your planning, and have they changed in these unprecedented times? Okay, we'll see you at the tables.